Hi, everyone. Welcome. As Darlene and Anne-Marie says, thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to read Brittany's bio, and then we're going to jump right ahead into our segment. Brittany Mellinger is an experienced fair housing educator and program manager. Prior to joining Pennsylvania Housing Relation Commission, she led fair housing efforts in Lancaster, PA, working to cultivate resources and develop partnerships. Brittany has experience collaborating with a wide range of stakeholders, from community members, experience in homelessness, housing providers, lending professional, service providers, and local leaders. With a master's in public health from Temple University, Brittany is passionate about the ways that housing impacts well-being of our community and is working towards a day when all Pennsylvanians are able to choose safe and healthy housing that meets their needs. All right, that's it. Brittany?
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the warm welcome, and thank you so much for putting this program on this afternoon. I'm going to share my screen, and then we'll get started. All right, so today we are going to be talking about understanding fair housing changes in Pennsylvania. As housing professionals, I am sure you've been following the headlines and the updates this year, and you know that there has been a lot of change in federal fair housing resources and enforcement. And as professionals on the front line of housing, working every day with sellers, buyers, owners, lenders, and more, you all are dealing with fair housing every day. So my goal today is to be able to equip you with the information that you need to navigate fair housing situations. So it's going to be a combination of some basic overview, some policy updates. We'll discuss some situations and provide some recommendations to continue advancing fair housing for all Pennsylvanians. I am absolutely comfortable with folks putting any comments and questions in the chat. Sorry, I'm just trying to zero out a screen here. As the presentation goes forward, I'll invite you to make commentary and answer questions as we go through this presentation. So please feel free to use the chat or raise your hand and contribute to the conversation. It's a lot more fun when it's more of a dialogue than me just straight presenting out. Our legal team asked me to include this engagement acknowledgement, letting you know that I'm not providing specific legal advice to anyone. This is just basic information about fair housing laws. We put a really strong emphasis on fair housing at the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission because everyone has the right to fair housing in our state, and we know how important housing is and how central it is to all of the things that that enable us to have strong communities and healthy lives. To provide some more specifics about what we're doing in the next hour, I will provide you a brief overview of the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission for anyone who's not familiar with our agency. We'll talk about fair housing protections. We'll talk about the impact of our fair housing changes, highlight some recent fair housing cases, and discuss ways to advance fair housing, as well as answering any questions that you might have. So the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, we call it PHRC for short. We are the state's leading civil rights enforcement agency in Pennsylvania. We've been around since 1955, so we are celebrating 70 years this year. Certainly not even close to the 95 years that you all are celebrating today, but we are very excited about our anniversary and the work that we have ahead. We work to make sure that Pennsylvanians can live, work, and learn free from unlawful discrimination. And we do that through a two-part mission. So first off, we enforce Pennsylvania's non-discrimination laws. So when folks believe that they've experienced a complaint, they can file a complaint with our agency free of charge and have an investigator look into the situation to see if there was a violation of either the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act or the Pennsylvania Fair Educational Opportunities Act. But we don't just sit around and wait for complaints to come in. We are actively doing outreach to promote equal opportunity for all in Pennsylvania. So we do that through programs and trainings and workshops like this one. We host events. We also have advisory councils throughout throughout the state of Pennsylvania that help connect with individuals in communities all throughout the state, making sure that everyone is fully aware of their rights and responsibilities under our laws. We serve the entire state of Pennsylvania through 3 regional offices. So in the western part of the state, that's supported by our Pittsburgh regional office. The central part of the state there in the light blue, that's supported by our Harrisburg regional office. And then the eastern part of the state is supported by our Philadelphia regional office. So that would be the regional office that you would be reaching out to with any questions or concerns that you might have. Now, our focus is going to be housing today, but PHRC's work goes beyond just housing. So we also cover employment, commercial property, public accommodations, such as the ability to access public services and businesses and spaces, as well as primary and secondary education up through high school. And that's all covered under the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act. Under the Pennsylvania Fair Educational Opportunities Act, that also includes colleges, trade schools, and technical schools. If you want further information about our work in any of those other spaces, our website is a great place to start. But we are going to begin our discussion today talking about our fair housing laws. And I always like to start the discussion with some conversation around the goals of fair housing. So what is fair housing seeking to do? A lot of folks are really familiar with goal number 1, ending housing discrimination, making sure that no one is kept out of housing opportunities because of unfair practices or policies. But fair housing is broader than that. It also seeks to promote diverse, inclusive communities, and that's known as affirmatively furthering fair housing. Now, there's been a lot of discussion around the definition of affirmatively furthering fair housing and how it's enforced. But the heart of it is that there have been a lot of policies and practices and laws that have limited housing opportunities for a lot of folks in Pennsylvania and beyond. And there's a lot of active work that's needed to make sure that everyone can actualize the promise of fair housing. So our fair housing laws cover the sale and the rental of housing, as well as housing related transactions. So sale and rental is relatively straightforward, but sometimes there's questions around, well, what does a housing related transaction actually mean? And that can include a multitude of things, from the ability to get a fair appraisal of the value of your home, to be able to get a mortgage, to be able to get insurance, any of these industries and transactions that can impact access to housing. The types of housing that are covered by our fair housing laws are really broad. So anything from apartments to single family homes, manufactured housing communities, condominiums, public housing, nursing homes, dormitories, and more. So even some types of shelters are covered under our fair housing laws. I want to highlight 2 discrimination theories or types of discrimination today. So the first one is disparate treatment. That's treatment that directly discriminates against a member of a protected class. It's what a lot of folks think about if they think about an instance of housing discrimination. Disparate impact can be a little bit harder to spot. So that's a policy that is neutral on its face, but it has that disproportionate or that disparate impact on a member of a protected class. Now, disparate impact has been in the headlines a lot this year around the executive order back in April, as well as the regulation from the Department of Justice that came out earlier this month. But I do want to highlight that these actions don't impact Pennsylvania's ability to enforce our laws and our fair housing protections, including disparate impact. We have several different layers of fair housing laws. So most of you are probably familiar with the Federal Fair Housing Act of 1968, but there's also Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, as well as the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, which provides additional protections for individuals with disabilities. At the state level, as I mentioned, it's the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act that covers Pennsylvania's fair housing protections. And these protections go beyond what's available at the federal level, or it's more expansive. Additionally, there are more than 70 different local ordinances throughout Pennsylvania that expand protections in fair housing, as well as other areas of civil rights protection. So you can see there's a little map there of some of the local ordinances in your area that are active and which provide additional protections. And that was taken from the Pennsylvania Youth Congress's website. They have a tracker there that helps to track local ordinances. I'd love for anyone who's familiar with an ordinance in your area to put that in the chat. If there's a local ordinance or human relations commission that you're familiar with, it would be great to hear from you. And if you are familiar with any additional protected classes that are put in place by that ordinance, I would love to see that in the chat as well. Or you can feel free to raise your hand and share that way if that's a little bit easier. On my next screen, I've got a list of our protected classes at the federal and at the state level. Let's see, I'm seeing someone is having some difficulty seeing the slideshow. Is that something that other folks are having difficulty with?
No, we can see it. I can see it.
Okay.
I'll connect with her.
Okay,
Okay,
fantastic. All right, I
thanks.
see we have a raised hand. Ahmed, go ahead.
Yeah, Brittany, I had a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. I'm not sure what the situation is, but in the news, I mean, Islamophobia is something that we've been dealing with all for a very long time, but now it's kind of getting serious. I don't know if that's a protected class, or is there anything you guys are doing about the Islamophobic things?
Yeah, so we do have protections on the basis of religious creed in Pennsylvania. So we do take Islamophobia, hate crimes, hate incidences very, very seriously at PHRC. We have a civil rights outreach coordinator division at PHRC, which does a lot of work in that space. And I will when I'm finished with the presentation, I'll get that link in the chat so that way you can connect with that team and learn a little bit more about some of the broader community civil tension work that team does. Thanks so much for that
That would
question.
be perfect. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. So my next slide has a list of protected classes, which we just got started discussing. Before I advance to there, I'd love to invite anyone to put in the chat any protected classes that you're familiar with. Any protected classes that are either at the federal or the state level. I see someone put age in, and age 40 and above is a protected class in Pennsylvania. That's in addition to the federal protected classes. We talked about religious creed. Hairstyle, yes. Thank you for highlighting that. The Crown Act was recently passed in Pennsylvania, which is a breaking development that we are all very excited about at PHRC, making sure that folks do not experience discrimination based on race-based and protective hairstyles. Let's see, national origin, absolutely. Religion, yeah. Disability, absolutely. Familial status, race, disability, familial status, gender, that would be covered under sex, absolutely. Any other ones? Any ones that we might be missing? Source of income is a great example of a local ordinance or a protection that's covered by local ordinance. So there are areas throughout Pennsylvania that have source of income protections, which make sure that individuals aren't unfairly denied housing because of where they get their housing assistance or the money that they use to pay their rent. So that's State College and the surrounding boroughs has a robust source of income protection, as well as Erie, Philadelphia, and I believe Lehigh County recently implemented that as well. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look. So on the left-hand side of the screen, under the Fair Housing Act, that includes race, color, national origin, familial status, religion, sex, and disability. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see our state protections. So you'll see they closely mirror the federal ones: race, color, national origin, familial status, religious creed, sex, and disability. And then we add on age 40 and above, as well as ancestry and the use, handling, or training of support animals for disability. I'm going to cover 3 protected classes in a little bit more detail, starting with familial status. So that includes families with children under the age of 18 who are living with their parents or their legal custodians. It includes people who are pregnant, as well as people securing custody of children under the age of 18, which includes both foster and biological children. There is an exemption for this, so there's certain types of senior housing that are covered by the Housing for Older Persons Act that would be able to exempt families with children because of the nature of that housing. Next, I want to cover sex as a protected class under the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act. So you didn't see sexual orientation, gender identity, LGBTQ as separate protected classes, either at the federal or the state level. In 2023, PHRC did finalize regulations that establish that the term sex may refer to pregnancy status, childbirth status, breastfeeding status, sex assigned at birth, gender identity or expression, affectional or sexual orientation, as well as differences in sex development. So we use these regulations as we accept complaints, conduct investigations, and adjudicate cases. If anyone believes that they are unfairly denied housing or treated unfairly in their housing because of their sexual orientation, because of their gender identity, they can file a complaint with PHRC and have that investigated under the protected class of sex. We do have that linked on the slide there, and you can find more information on our website as well as a fact sheet. We're trying to actively promote awareness of this protection because this is something that used to be available at the federal level. Under the previous administration, HUD did accept complaints on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity under the protected class of sex, but that is no longer the case. So the state enforcement is where folks would go to get remedy if they believe they've experienced housing discrimination. I also want to define disability as well. So that's defined as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more of a person's major life activities. Examples can include caring for oneself, walking, seeing, hearing, speaking, breathing, learning, or working. And our fair housing laws protect those who have a disability, those who have a history of a disability, and those who are regarded as having a disability. So someone doesn't need to specifically have a disability to receive unfair treatment on the basis of how someone sees them or perceives them or has knowledge of their history, particularly around disabilities that have a lot of stigma attached to them. So it's important that everyone be fully aware of those protections. There are some limited exemptions here as well. So individuals who are currently using illegal drugs or controlled substances would be exempted from disability-related protections. So folks who are in active recovery would still have disability-related protections, but those who are currently using illegal drugs would not. Additionally, individuals who would pose a direct threat to the health and safety of others would be exempted from disability-related protections. Right, so we're going to move on to a brief discussion on some discriminatory acts to make sure that we're avoiding in our housing practices. So it can be anything from discriminatory statements about that would indicate a preference or a limitation about someone's protected class, discriminatory inquiries, asking someone about their religion or their sex, their familial status, their age in their housing, steering someone to a specific type of housing, a specific floor, a specific neighborhood on the basis of their protected class, limiting their housing opportunities based on your assumption about what housing would be good for them. Refusing to sell, lease, or finance housing to someone based on their protected class, or providing an unfair appraisal of the value of someone's home based on their protected class. Predatory lending practices, as well as discriminating in housing terms and conditions, Unequally providing services and facilities. So someone not having full access to the facilities on the premises. So saying that families with children can't use the pool or use the laundry facilities, restricting maintenance services based on someone's protected class. Sexually harassing tenants or employees, that would be discriminatory, as well as refusing to provide reasonable accommodations and modifications for individuals with disabilities. These are all practices that are prohibited by our fair housing laws. So we'll do a brief scenario here. Everyone get their chat boxes open. Say a buyer asks if a neighborhood is good for families with children. How would you respond in that situation to provide a response that's compliant with our fair housing laws? Anyone have any ideas about a good way to respond to that? And if you'd rather unmute or raise your hand, that's fine as well.
Hi, this is Charlotte Bradley. How are
Yes.
you?
Good. Go ahead, Charlotte.
I would ask them to, you said if they ask their children, tell them to take a tour around the area of where they want to live and determine how they feel with regards to children and things of that sort.
Yeah, so allow them to have their own perception of the neighborhood rather than influencing how they might think about or providing your own perspective.
Yes.
So I see some comment in the chat as well. So providing some information about the schools and play areas that are nearby, doing your own research for the area to see if this might have things that your kids would want, such as playground, schools, or other amenities. Sending specifics based on research. Absolutely. These are all great suggestions. Making sure that you're not putting your personal bias or steering them towards a specific area based on your own perceptions, making sure that they're able to make their own decisions and access research to get objective facts and they can
Brittany,
make an
quick
informed
question for you.
decision. Yeah, absolutely.
Hi, my name is Jose. Quick question. When it comes to familiar status, so clarify that for me a little bit. So if I'm interviewing clients, I do need to know how many people that are going to be moving in to kind of get an idea as to where I'm going. So that's not what you're referring to, right?
You can certainly ask how many people are going to be in the
Right.
household, absolutely. But you don't want to be asking specifics about, how many kids, what ages, things like that.
Oh, you don't want to hit ages or anything like that? No, just the amount of people. That's a good one for me. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, great question. Thank you for asking that.
Mhm.
All right, I want to go into a little bit more detail about reasonable accommodations and modifications for individuals with disabilities next, because that's an area where we get a lot of complaints at PHRC, and there's also a lot of nationwide fair housing complaints as well. So individuals with disabilities have protections against all of those other practices, but they have the unique ability to request reasonable accommodations and modifications that are needed to use and enjoy their housing. So I want to provide some clarification on the two terms. When we're talking about a reasonable modification, that's when there's a structural change made to the premises. You're making a physical change. A reasonable accommodation is when there's a change, exception, adjustment to a rule, a policy, a practice, or a service. All right. I'm also seeing a comment in the chat that there was a client that specifically told her realtor that she wanted a condo, and the agent kept showing her single homes because she had kids. So that's a good example of steering based on familial status, limiting someone's housing opportunities by assumptions about what they might need because of their protected class. I would love to invite everyone to put some examples of reasonable modifications or accommodations in the chat. If they are familiar with requests of either structural changes that might be needed by an individual with a disability, or a change to policy or practice or service. All right, let's see. We've got shower handrails, a stair lift, ramp, handicap parking, handle rail in the shower or tub, and accessibility ramp. Those are all excellent examples of reasonable modifications, those structural changes. Does anyone have any ideas about any policy changes that might be helpful? Okay, a call to tell someone with a brain injury and short-term memory loss that the rent is due. That would be a great example of a rule or a practice, a policy change. Support animals. So an exception to a no pet policy, or an exception to a pet rent policy to allow an individual that needs a support animal to have that support animal in their housing with them. Designated reserved parking, absolutely. And then a doorbell with a strobe light is another great reasonable modification example. Thank you so much. A modification, it is discriminatory to refuse to allow a person with a disability permission to modify and pay for changes to enable them to use a facility. So I want to state that clearly. In the private market, it's the tenant's responsibility to make their request. It's the housing provider's responsibility to grant permission, and then it's the tenant's responsibility to pay for it, assuming that it's a reasonable request. If it's a federally assisted property that receives federal funds, the tenant makes the request, and then the housing provider is responsible to pay for the modification. And then a housing provider may require the resident to restore the interior back to the original condition at the end of the tenancy minus normal wear and tear. And we covered both of those examples in our discussion in the chat. For reasonable accommodations, we've got some examples here. So not allowing a person with disability income to pay their rent on a different date than other tenants, which I see was just highlighted in the chat as well. Refusing to designate reserved parking for an individual with a disability who needs it to access their housing. So even if there's already handicap parking available at a facility, sometimes someone might need reserved parking that's always available to them, not parking that's generally available to anyone that's parking at the facility. And then support animals is a big issue that we see under reasonable accommodations. We get a lot of complaints on the basis of folks who believe they've been unfairly denied the ability to have either a service or emotional support animal, even if there's a no pet policy.
Brittany?
At the property. Yeah.
I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
On that topic, actually, when it comes to rentals with the no pet policy, where kind of is the guideline or like the line when it comes to the difference between like an actual like service animal and like even like an emotional support animal, and where is the variance, and what level, I guess, would somebody either as a landlord or whatever have in deciding whether or not that falls under a pet or it falls under a medical support animal? Like, are the landlords allowed to even ask for documentation on the animal to verify that it's not a pet?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something that a lot of housing providers have a lot of confusion about how to handle appropriately. So if the disability and the disability related need for the animal is not observable, you can ask for additional documentation. So if someone is coming in clearly with a vision impairment with a guide dog, their disability and their need for that animal, that's clearly evident. But oftentimes with emotional support animals, you're not going to know that individual's disability or their needs. So you can ask for some documentation about their need for the animal. It can come from their doctor, their therapist, their psychiatrist, a licensed social worker, any licensed professional with a reasonable knowledge of that person's condition can attest to their need for the animal, and that would be appropriate documentation. I want to get to the first part of your question, which is the difference between service and support animals. Service animals are typically trained. In most cases, they're a dog. In some limited situations, they're mini horses as well. And service animals have protections both in public spaces as well as in housing. ESAs, emotional support animals or support animals, there's lots of varying overlapping terms there. They are less likely to have training, and they can be a much broader spectrum of animal. It can be anything that's commonly held in a household. So a dog, a cat, a bird, a turtle, anything, any common animal can be that emotional support animal. So that's when you can ask for that verification to make sure that this is a legitimate request and not a pet. I did see that there's a comment in the chat about the Pennsylvania Assistance and Service Animal Integrity Act of 2018, which is a really helpful resource. That was an act that was passed that does make it unlawful to falsely represent that an animal is a service or support animal when it's actually just a pet. We do have like a full 2-hour training just on animals that I'm happy to offer at another date. But I do see a comment in the chat here about not asking the nature of the disability. Yes, so you want to steer clear of asking any specifics about someone's disability. You don't want to ask about their diagnosis. You don't want to invite them to share any medical records, anything that specific. You just need to know, do they have a disability and a disability-related need?
So when asking for that documentation, would that come from their doctor?
It can come from their doctor. It can come from any licensed professional with reasonable knowledge of their condition, though. So it can be from their therapist. It can be from a social worker that's working with them. It can be any professional that has reasonable knowledge. The reasonable knowledge is key, though, because a lot of folks get these letters from the internet. You know, they pay
Right.
$99, they get this letter. And the question is, well, does that individual really know that the details of their condition and their need for that animal? Guidance that HUD has issued in the past has stated that that by itself is not sufficient to establish that need. So you can ask for further documentation from a provider. That guidance has since been rescinded by the administration, but I do believe it's a best practice. All right, we have a scenario about support animals, and I'd love to hear about how you would handle this, since I hear that this is an emerging issue. So say a home buyer makes a request to bring a support animal to a showing. How would you respond? And while folks are thinking about how they might respond, I will respond to the question in the chat. For support animals, are there any breed restrictions? And there are no breed restrictions or weight restrictions for animals. If it is an exotic animal that's not commonly kept in a home, you can ask some clarifying questions about the support that it offers for that individual, but there are no specific breed restrictions. Would anyone like to voice some thoughts about how they might handle a request to bring a support animal to a showing for a home? Yeah, let the listing agent know and provide documentation if needed. That's a great approach. Anyone else? This is a situation where there could be competing disability-related needs. So it could potentially raise an issue if the seller is allergic, as Sherry just put in the chat. So that's something that you would need to navigate, trying to make sure that that you're being cognizant of allergies and also making sure that the prospective home buyer feels supported and has their needs met. So that can be a little challenging to navigate. But in general, I want to provide some best practices for accommodating reasonable accommodation and modification requests. So making sure that there's an established policy for handling requests, making sure that it's fully documented so that way you have very clear records on what was requested and how it was responded to. Only asking for the information that's needed to process the request, not asking folks to fill out reams of paperwork and provide details about their medical conditions. Allowing sufficient time for documentation to be submitted, but responding back to the tenant in a timely manner, not letting the request stand for weeks on end while they're not having their disability-related needs met. And most importantly, I think, is engaging in interactive dialogue to meet the needs of the tenant. So even if you can't grant that specific request, because of other disability related needs or feasibility issues or issues around the burden of what's being requested, seeing what can be done to make sure that that tenant is able to use and enjoy their housing. And I see a comment in the chat as well about fear from previous bites and things like that. That is also a consideration that would need to be navigated in that situation. All right, it's been an eventful year in the fair housing space. I would like to invite anyone to put in the chat any fair housing changes that they're familiar with, anything that you've seen in the headlines or has been impacting your work. I've highlighted a couple in the course of our discussion so far, but I'd like to hear from you all as well. So there's been a change in Philadelphia with deposits. Thank you for sharing that. I'll let folks add stuff in the chat as they are able, but I will advance the presentation in the interest of time as well. So I want to focus primarily on some of the federal changes, since there have not been significant changes at the state level recently. So there was an executive order that directed federal agencies to stop enforcing protections related to sexual orientation and gender identity, as I mentioned earlier. There was also an executive order that directed HUD to stop enforcing the equal access rule. So that was around people's rights in shelter, as well as federally assisted properties, specifically around sexual orientation and gender identity. There was also an executive order that directed federal agencies to stop enforcing disparate impact, right? So looking at those policies and practices that would have a disproportionate impact on individuals in protected classes. There was a proposed rule regarding affirmatively furthering fair housing that was released that reduced the compliance requirements to be in compliance with affirmatively furthering fair housing. There have been significant staffing cuts at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, which have caused significant delays in investigating cases. Had removed translated fair housing materials from their website, so limiting resources to communities that rely on translated materials to understand their rights. There were a couple memos that were issued from HUD. One was regarding enforcement priorities that deprioritized looking at appraisal bias, environmental justice, local zoning, screening for felony convictions, as well as gender identity. And then there was also one that rescinded federal fair housing guidance documents, including limited English proficiency, assistance animals, special purpose credit programs, criminal records, source of income testing, addressing digital programs, and more. So a lot of that guidance has been pulled back from that website. I also see that there were staffing cuts at the Office of Housing Counseling at HUD as well. So we've seen some significant steps back in this space. And then, as I mentioned, there has been additional action regarding disparate impact in the past week. So what does this mean for our communities? There's a lot of uncertainty about LGBTQ plus protections, as many individuals might be unaware of their protections that are available through BHRC's regulations. We see potential for increase in fair housing issues because there may be folks that perceive a lack of federal accountability and think that they might be able to get away with more. Immigrant communities may be fearful about retaliation for filing complaints, as well as the staffing levels mean for longer complaint timelines at the federal level. There's been a lot of discussion about potential cuts to housing assistance programs and shifts away from addressing the complex systemic issues that we do know impact housing opportunities for everyone across the country. And that also means there's a lack of clarity for housing professionals who are seeking to be in compliance with our fair housing laws. All right, I'm going to skip the next scenario in the interest of time, because I did want to cover a few fair housing cases as well. So I wanted to provide kind of an overview based on the most recent publicly available data, which is from our 2023 to 2024. We'll be releasing our next set of data in March. We did receive 156 complaints of housing discrimination, with the highest levels of complaint for disability, retaliation for filing a complaint, as well as discrimination on race. And the top 3 acts of harm that were reported in these complaints were eviction, unfair terms and conditions, as well as refusal to make reasonable accommodations. So that's a lot of what we're seeing these days. Folks file complaints to get remedy for their situation, and that could include the ability to get that reasonable accommodation or modification, changes to the lease. So there's fair policies, posting of notices, required training, as well as financial remedies as well. I see in the chat that there was also withdrawal of funding for FIP organizations. Yep, that's Fair Housing Initiative programs that provide fair housing outreach and education. And yeah, we receive a wide variety of complaints. It's not just based on one protected class. So you can see here's some recent housing awards that came from fair housing cases at PHRC. So $1.5 million case, that's a housing provider who failed to provide accessible units. An ignored request for reasonable accommodations for tenants with disabilities, $100,000, that's a maintenance worker that sexually harassed a female tenant. There's a $90,000 case where a housing provider revoked a lease and failed to address neighbor harassment based on race. And then $77,000 where a housing provider made discriminatory statements and refused to rent to a household based on familial status. So if you're aware of a fair housing issue, you want to file a complaint, you would just make a complaint at the regional office that's nearest to you. I'm happy to share out these slides to anyone who would contact me, or you can get this information off our website as well. But I did want to provide some cases that were more specific to your industry as well. So these are some national cases that were filed in 2025. So the first one was in New York. That's the Housing Opportunities Made Equal versus Avant Realty. So this was a settlement that was based on alleged racial steering in New York, and the settlement terms included training, policy adoption, and monitoring for several years. In United States versus Menendez, that was the case in Puerto Rico. That was alleged discrimination on the basis of disability. So there's a blind applicant that was denied tenancy because of the use of a guide dog, and settlement terms included a $12,000 fine, as well as required policy adoption, training, and reporting. And then the last one is the United States versus Kailua Village Condominium Association. So there was a consent order that required $50,000 in damages, as well as required fair housing training. In this situation, the homebuyer with paraplegia was denied the unit, subjected to discriminatory terms and conditions, and refused reasonable accommodations and modifications, and also experienced harassment. So there were a number of issues in that case. Let's see, there's a couple questions in the chat. I would be happy to share out these slides to anyone who emails me, and I will put my email in the chat so that way folks can reach out to me directly. I don't think that they will be shared to all of the attendees automatically. So please reach out if you'd like to have this information. And I will take a look at the situation and the link, Ahmed. I'm not sure, I don't have immediate familiarity, and I'm not able to comment on it at this time. But Monique, please feel free to raise your question. Monique, if you'd like to unmute, you're welcome to do so, or put your comment in the chat.
Okay, sorry, I was trying to unmute. No, I didn't want to interrupt your presentation, but recently I've been seeing with landlords for rental properties, like asking immigration status prior to proceeding with the application. Like, can you speak on that? Like, usually it's just an ID, like, they would provide their non-driver's license or driver's license, but now I have questions like, are they a green card holder or are they a US citizen? And I'm like, or should we be asked, but I've seen
I
that with
would,
rentals.
okay, yeah, I would be very, very cautious about asking those types of questions because
Yeah.
immigration status is so closely tied with national origin.
But
Um,
this is the landlord asking, like, if I provide an application to them for their properties, and I'm like, I wouldn't ask the potential tenant that, so I wouldn't know. They're giving us the information that we need.
yeah, I would uh, provide education to that landlord, let them know that they are opening themselves up to fair housing liability by trying to ask
Mhm.
these questions and get this information. And there are fair housing protections for individuals based on national origin. Uh,
Yeah.
so, so those questions and that information isn't relevant to the tenant selection process.
Okay. That's what I thought. Thank
Yeah,
you.
because if you're working with landlords that are asking for that information, you're also opening yourself up to liability as well.
Hmm. Yeah.
Quick question, Brittany.
Yeah.
First of all, Monique, thank you for that because I actually experienced the same thing with the landlord, and they had to basically tell him that all the information that we needed was in the application. They can look over the application again. So come across that too, which is kind of awkward, but yes. And the other quick
Mhm.
question is when it comes to the emotional support dogs, and they were talking about earlier really quickly, are you still allowed to charge them a deposit for those when they're coming in on the lease or no?
No, no extra deposits beyond what you would normally be charging an individual for their security deposits. So no pet deposits, no pet fees, no
No
pet
pet
rent.
deposit on those. Okay, so no on both emotional support and
Yep. Yeah,
well,
emotional
okay,
support
gotcha.
and service animals are treated exactly the same under fair housing, which exempts them from those extra fees.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. If that animal would cause damage to the property,
Right.
that you could take that out of the security deposit and hold that tenant financially liable for that, but you can't take it out on the front end.
Understood.
Okay. So a lot of the information that I've covered so far, it's been challenging, right? Especially for folks on the front line of advancing housing rights for individuals. But I do want to share some closing thoughts, reflections, and ideas for ways that we can all work together to advance fair housing opportunities. And I really love this quote by Eleanor Roosevelt, even though it was a long time ago, it still rings really true. So where, after all, do universal human rights begin? In small places, close to home, so close and small that they cannot be seen on the maps of the world. Yet they are the world of the individual person, the neighborhood he lives in, the school or college he attends, the factory, the farm, the office where he works. Such are the places where every man, woman, and child seeks equal justice, equal opportunity, equal dignity without discrimination. Unless these rights have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere. Without concerted citizen action to uphold them close to home, we shall look for vain in progress in the larger world. So how do we advance fair housing in our current environment? Knowing where your fair housing resources are. Someone mentioned fifth organizations in the chat, and while there has been challenges in funding, I do know these organizations are continuing to provide service. They're continuing to work within some of the federal restrictions and get the information out to communities at risk of housing discrimination. So there are local organizations throughout the state. Two that are active in your area would be the Housing Equality Center of Pennsylvania and the Fair Housing Rights Center in Southeastern Pennsylvania. They are both excellent organizations and excellent resources for training and information and support for individuals who believe they're experiencing discrimination. Working with your local disability advocacy programs, immigrant services organizations, your housing counseling agencies, your first-time homebuyer programs, providing that access to home ownership for folks who have not had that in the past, as well as federal, state, and local housing coalitions as well. The Fair Housing Rights Center is still open and is still active. Yeah, I'm not sure where that information came from, but I was just talking with Angela last week. Working to foster inclusive environments through your work. So paying attention to your advertisements and the language that you're using, the images that you're using, the way that you're distributing housing information and opportunities, making sure that you're providing these services to all communities without restrictions on protected class. treating all clients and customers with fairness and consistency, as well as making sure that everyone in your company is receiving regular fair housing training. So everyone from the maintenance workers to the front office staff to your real estate licensees to the heads of the company, it's important that everyone is aware of fair housing practices and knows how to appropriately respond to situations. And keeping an eye on policy that impacts your work. So some of the big ones that we're looking at now are fairness and background screenings, how criminal backgrounds can be used, how eviction histories can be used, and things like that. Source of income protections that are currently available in various localities throughout Pennsylvania, potentially looking at ways to increase that, ways to make affirmatively furthering fair housing more robust and enforceable. Of course, providing funding for housing assistance programs and fair housing programs and funding for home repair. Pennsylvania has aging housing stock, some of the oldest in the country, so investment in home repair is needed to make sure that everyone has adequate and safe housing opportunities. I want to highlight a few fair housing resources, and then we'll have a couple minutes for questions at the end. So I want to highlight that we do have fair housing training programs that can be offered virtually or in person. We've got information on our website on that. Please feel free to also shoot me an email if you have any questions. We do offer a monthly Fair Housing Empower Hour webinar. It's just a 1-hour introduction on various fair housing topics. So on Friday, we'll be covering fair housing accessibility. We've got a lot of brochures and fact sheets on our website that you can download, or we can mail out physical copies to you as well. We also have a white paper looking at barriers to fair housing opportunities called the State of Fair Housing in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I send out a quarterly fair housing e-newsletter, which is a great resource for any updates and resources and trainings that are available, any events that we have coming up, keep you in the know. We also have a fair housing line where you can call when you have questions, when you've got a situation that you're not quite sure how to handle. It's a free resource to get access to resources and information. I lastly want to highlight that we have an AFFH task force that is comprised of folks across the Commonwealth, local government leaders, local human relations commissions, housing advocates, and professionals and more, folks that are actively working to advance housing opportunities. Would love to have you be a part of that if you're interested in that. And with that, I will leave you with my contact information, as well as our website and our central office address. So thank you all for your active participation, and please feel free to put your questions in the chat. Ahmed, I'll add your name to the your name and emails to the list, so that way you can get that as well. Absolutely.
Thank you.
I will close out my screen so we can see each other, and I will also put in the link I promised earlier for our Civil Rights Division.
Brittany, thank you so much for that presentation. Lots of good information there. Thank everyone for their questions. Do we have any, maybe we can take 1 or 2 questions if there are any more. I know we are kind of running past our time, and we want to do a little celebration before we end today. But we definitely appreciate you supporting us and coming and speaking on behalf of Bucks County and the DEI committee. Are there any questions? I see the link.
I do see one question looking at credit score, asking if credit score is part of income for discrimination. So credit score is something that we look at when we're looking at fair tenant screening, since that can be an issue of potential disparate impact, but there's no specific guidance that's current on that. So I mean, credit is something that is tied to our banking institution, and who's had access to financial lending, and there's potential for a lot of disparate treatment or disparate impact on the basis of race. So you want to make sure that if that's part of your tenant screening criteria, that you're implementing that in a fair way, potentially talking with your solicitor or your attorney to make sure that your specific policy is in alignment with fair housing. A resource that is actually free and available is through Regional Housing Legal Services. They do a free tenant screening policy review. So they will review that for any housing provider that wants a review and recommendations to make sure that their policy is compliant. And I'll put their email in the chat as well if anyone is interested in that resource.
Okay. I think we should move on with the program while she's putting that information in. We do.
Jolene, do you mind if I say one thing? I'm
Yes.
so sorry. Brittany, I want to say thank you for being here and providing us with that information. When you started the program, I felt a little sad, I guess you could say, may not be the grown-up word to say, but sad in some of the changes that are happening from all the progress that there was. But then towards the end, sorry for me to summarize my thoughts and share with everybody. But at the end, all the resources that are available in the state, we're not even talking at the federal level, that's just amazing. So I want to say thank you for sharing all those resources. So the realtors have a place to go, or the community has a place to go where they can talk to somebody and know that not only at the federal level, but at the state level, someone's behind you to try and talk out whatever you may be experiencing. So thanks for enlightening me.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for that reflection. That was my goal. It's daunting to talk about fair housing in our current environment, but I want you all to know that you're not alone in advancing fair housing.
All right. Thank you so much. We are